There's a town in Florida where the locals will literally give you wrong directions on purpose just so you can't find the good beach. And honestly, after seeing it, I get why. Everybody thinks they know Florida. The $30 Disney churros, the Miami clubs where a bottle of water costs more than your rent, the highway that turns into a parking lot every single afternoon at exactly 4:15. That Florida is real, but it's also the Florida they want you to see. Today we're going somewhere else. 12 towns that still feel like the Florida from the old postcards, the ones with the pastel sunsets and the empty white sand, before the place got discovered and paved and turned into a $40 parking lot with a beach attached. A few previews of what's coming. One town on this list has more manatees than people, and the manatees seem fine with that arrangement. Another one banned chain restaurants so hard that the closest McDonald's is in a different county. There's a fishing village where the entire economy runs on smoked mullet, and yes, I'm going to explain what that means. And one place so quiet that the biggest crime reported last year was a stolen golf cart that turned up 2 streets over with a full tank. If you make it to number 1 without subscribing, I want you to know the algorithm is watching, your grandmother is disappointed, and somewhere a manatee is crying. So hit the button, let's get into it. Number 12. Cedar Key. Picture a fishing village that time forgot, sitting on a cluster of tiny islands off Florida's Gulf Coast, about an hour southwest of Gainesville. Cedar Key has roughly 700 people, and on a busy day, that number might creep up to 704. The whole place looks like a Hemingway novel decided to become a zip code. To understand Cedar Key, you have to understand what it used to be. Back in the 1800s, this was a booming port town, one of the busiest on the Gulf with a railroad terminus and a thriving industry harvesting cedar wood for pencils. Then the cedar ran out, a hurricane flattened the port, and the railroad moved on. The town that was left behind stopped chasing growth and just settled into being itself. That accident of history is exactly why it feels frozen in amber today. The thing that makes Cedar Key feel like paradise is what it refuses to be. There are no high-rise condos blocking the sunset. There's no chain anything. The town runs on clams, fishing boats, and a slow rhythm where the most urgent thing happening on a Tuesday is deciding which dock to watch the pelicans from. It's become one of the biggest clam farming spots in the country, so the seafood comes off the boat and onto your plate in a timeline that would make a city health inspector nervous and a food lover weep with joy. You can sit on a weathered dock at sunset, watch the islands turn gold, and genuinely forget what year it is. So what's the catch? Cedar Key is genuinely remote. The nearest real grocery store, the nearest hospital, the nearest anything with a drive-through is a serious drive away. And because it sits low and exposed on the Gulf, hurricanes have hit this town hard, more than once in recent years, damaging homes and businesses along the waterfront. The locals rebuild every single time, which tells you something about how much they love it. But if you want a place that's easy, this isn't it. This is paradise for people who consider isolation a feature, not a bug. Which brings us to a town that took the chain restaurant problem and made it a literal law. Number 11. Seaside. If Seaside looks familiar, there's a reason. This is the town that used to film The Truman Show, the movie about a man whose entire life turns out to be a staged reality. And once you know that, you cannot unsee it. Seaside on the Florida Panhandle along scenic Highway 30A is almost aggressively perfect. Pastel cottages with white picket fences, brick streets, people riding cruiser bikes to get artisanal popsicles. It is the most photogenic town in the state, and it knows it. Seaside has a genuinely interesting origin. In the early 1980s, a developer inherited 80 acres of panhandle scrubland and decided to build something nobody else was building, a walkable town where you wouldn't need a car. It became the birthplace of a design philosophy called New Urbanism, which is a fancy way of saying everything is human-scaled, beautiful, and intentional. No strip, malls, no giant parking lots, houses close together with front porches built specifically so neighbors would actually talk to each other. Architects from around the world still make pilgrimages here to study how it works. The beaches along 30A are some of the whitest, softest sand in America, the kind that squeaks under your feet because it's made of pure quartz, washed down from the Appalachian Mountains over thousands of years. The water turns a shade of green you usually only see in travel ads that have been color-corrected. Here's the honest part. Seaside is gorgeous and Seaside is expensive. This is not a budget paradise. Buying a cottage here will cost you the kind of money that makes you reconsider your life choices, your career, and possibly your ancestors' career choices too. The beauty has a price tag, and the price tag has a comma in a place you weren't expecting. The 30A corridor has become one of the most exclusive stretches of coast in the South. But for a long weekend, or for the dream of someday, it's worth seeing what happens when a town is designed entirely around making people slow down and breathe. If you're enjoying these, do me a favor and hit subscribe. I cover the best places to live, retire, and disappear in America every single week, and the next towns on this list only get better. Now let's keep climbing. Number 10, Apalachicola. Say it with me. Apalachicola. It rolls off the tongue once you get going, and the town is just as charming as the name. This is an old oyster town on the Panhandle, the kind of place where the entire local identity was built on harvesting oysters out of the bay for well over a century. At its peak, this single bay produced a staggering share of all the oysters eaten in the entire state, and a meaningful chunk of what the country ate too. Apalachicola is all brick warehouses, restored downtown storefronts, and a working waterfront where shrimp boats and oyster skiffs still come and go. It has genuine history layered everywhere. This was a major cotton port before the Civil War, and you can still see the old cotton warehouses repurposed into shops and restaurants. There's a downtown you can walk end to end in 15 minutes, packed with little seafood joints, bookshops, antique stores, and a famous old inn. The whole town feels like it's marinated in salt air and Spanish moss, with a side of history you can actually touch. The catch here is bittersweet, and it's a real one. The famous Apalachicola oyster industry collapsed in recent years. A brutal combination of overharvesting, drought, and a long-running water dispute with Georgia and Alabama upstream starved the bay of the freshwater it needed, and the wild oyster harvest was shut down entirely to give the population a chance to recover. For a town whose entire soul was built on those oysters, that was devastating. Generations of oystermen had to find new work. The town has been reinventing itself around tourism, farmed seafood, and its history, and it's finding its footing. But the old way of life took a serious blow. What you're seeing is a town in the middle of writing its next chapter. That's part of what makes it feel so real. It isn't a museum, it's a place still fighting for its future. Number 9, Mount Dora. Now let's go inland, because not all of Florida paradise has a beach. Mount Dora sits on the shore of a lake about 40 minutes northwest of Orlando, and it has somehow stayed a small, hilly, New England-looking village while one of the busiest tourist cities on Earth grew up next door. Mount Dora is built on actual elevation, which in Florida is borderline miraculous, since most of the state is flatter than a pancake that's been stepped on. The town sits on a bluff overlooking Lake Dora, and the rolling streets, the canopy of old oaks, and the lakeside setting give it a feel more like a quaint mountain town than anything you'd expect from Central Florida. The historic downtown is full of antique shops, a beloved old lighthouse on the lake, and a 100-year-old inn that anchors the whole place. They lean into festivals hard. Art festivals, craft festivals, a sailing regatta, and a famous lighting display around the holidays that drapes the entire downtown in millions of lights and turns it into something out of a snow globe minus the snow. For a town of its size, the calendar is absurdly full, which keeps it feeling alive year-round rather than seasonal. The downside, Mount Dora has been discovered. Its proximity to Orlando means the secret is mostly out, and on festival weekends the streets fill up and the parking becomes a competitive blood sport. Home prices have climbed steadily as more people figured out you can live somewhere genuinely charming, with hills and a lake and character, while still being a short drive from a major international airport and the theme parks. It's still paradise. It's just paradise with a slightly longer wait for a brunch table than it had 10 years ago. Number 8, Boca Grande. Boca Grande sits on Gasparilla Island on the Gulf Coast, and it operates on a completely different frequency than the rest of Florida. The primary mode of transportation here is the golf cart. People take golf carts to dinner, to the beach, to the post office, to pick up their kids from school. There's a historic lighthouse from the 1890s, a famous old railroad-era inn, and a downtown that looks like it hasn't changed in decades, entirely on purpose. The island has a fascinating backstory. It was once a phosphate shipping port, connected to the mainland by railroad, and the wealthy industrialists who passed through fell in love with the fishing and the quiet and started wintering here. That old money, old Florida character never left. There are no traffic lights anywhere on the island, no chain stores, no neon, just a slow, breezy calm that feels like stepping back into a 1950s summer that someone managed to preserve under glass. This island is famous for tarpon fishing. Every spring, the waters around Boca Grande Pass fill with enormous silver tarpon, some over 100 pounds, and anglers come from all over the world to chase them. It's been called the tarpon fishing capital of the world, and during the season the pass fills with boats in a tradition that goes back generations. The catch is the price, and it's a steep one. Boca Grande is one of the wealthiest enclaves in the entire state, the kind of place where the modest-looking little beach cottages carry prices that are anything but modest, and the bigger homes climb into territory most people will only ever see. In listings, they open for fun. This is paradise that has been carefully, deliberately, expensively preserved, and preserving paradise this nice tends to attract people with very deep pockets. You can visit and feel the magic for the cost of a day trip and a golf cart rental. Living there full-time is a different conversation entirely. Number 7. Crystal River. Remember the town with more manatees than people? This is it. Crystal River on the Gulf Coast, about an hour and a half north of Tampa, is built around a network of natural springs that pump out crystal clear water at a constant 72 degrees year-round. And every winter, hundreds of manatees pile into those warm springs to escape the colder Gulf water, turning the place into a gentle traffic jam of giant friendly sea cows. Crystal River is the only place in America where you can legally swim with wild manatees in their natural habitat. These are slow, enormous, profoundly chill creatures that look like someone crossed a seal with a potato. And floating in clear spring water next to one is the kind of experience that recalibrates your entire nervous system. The springs feed a system of rivers and bays that stay swimmable in any season, and the whole town is oriented around the water. Kayaks, boats, dive shops, and spring-fed swimming holes are basically the local economy. The town also sits next to some genuinely deep history. There are ancient Native American mounds nearby, thousands of years old, a reminder that people have been drawn to these springs for a very, very long time. So the appeal isn't new, it's just finally getting the attention it deserves. So what's the catch? Crystal River's biggest asset is also its biggest pressure point. The manatees in the springs draw a steady stream of tourists, especially in the winter months, and managing that crowd without loving the springs to death is a constant balancing act for the town. The water has to be protected. The manatees, which are a protected species, have to be left alone and treated gently. And that means strict rules, designated seasons, and limits that some visitors find frustrating. But honestly, a town that puts the manatees first is exactly the kind of town I want to root for. We're past the halfway point, the towns are getting better, and if you've made it this far, without subscribing, I'm choosing to believe it's an oversight and not a personal betrayal. Fix it. The next one is one of my favorites. Number 6. Fernandina Beach. Up in the far northeast corner of Florida, almost spilling over into Georgia, sits Amelia Island, and on it, the town of Fernandina Beach. This place has a genuinely wild history. It's known as the town under 8 flags because over the centuries it was claimed, captured, and reclaimed by so many different nations and factions that they basically lost count. The French, the Spanish, the British, the Patriots, the Mexicans, a couple of short-lived rebel republics, the Confederacy, and finally the United States. For a brief stretch, it was even a smuggler's haven and a notorious den of pirates and rum runners. Today, Fernandina Beach has a beautifully preserved Victorian downtown, 50 blocks of it listed on the National Register, with restored mansions, a famous old saloon that claims to be the oldest in the state, and storefronts that feel like a film set, except people actually live and work there. There's a working shrimping harbor, and the town claims to be the birthplace of the modern shrimping industry. The beaches are wide and quiet with hard-packed sand you can ride a bike on, and the surrounding island still has maritime forest and marsh that developers never got to. The catch is the familiar one for a town this charming. Word has gotten out. Amelia Island has upscale resorts and golf communities on one end, and that popularity has pushed property values up steadily over the years. Fernandina Beach itself is still more attainable than the flashy resort enclaves down the island, But it's no longer a hidden secret. The good news is the town has fiercely protected its historic core, so even as it grows, that old Victorian heart stays intact. You're paying for a place that refuses to bulldoze its own soul, and that's worth something. Number 5, Dunedin. Dunedin, just north of Clearwater on the Gulf Coast, is what happens when a town decides to be genuinely fun without becoming a tourist trap. It has Scottish roots that it leans into hard, with bagpipe bands, a Highland Games festival, and a downtown sprinkled with Scottish references. There's a walkable, lively core packed with breweries and restaurants, and a connection to two of the best beach parks in the entire state. Here's what makes Dunedin special. It sits at the gateway to Honeymoon Island and Caladesi Island, two state parks with some of the most pristine, undeveloped beaches you'll find anywhere in Florida. Caladesi is regularly ranked among the best beaches in America, and the only way to reach it is by ferry or by paddling over yourself, which naturally keeps the crowds thin and the sand clean. The town itself is built for bikes and walking, with the beloved Pinellas Trail, a converted rail line running right through the heart of downtown. It became a craft beer destination almost by accident, with one of the highest concentrations of breweries per capita in the state. The downside? Dunedin has become legitimately popular, and the downtown can get packed, especially on weekends and during its many festivals. The brewery scene exploded, the restaurants are excellent, and all of that draws people from across the busy Tampa Bay area. Real estate has climbed accordingly, and what was once a sleepy retiree town now has a waitlist energy to it. It's still one of the most livable towns on this list, but the secret spot era is firmly behind it. The trade-off is you get a town that's alive, walkable, and sitting right next to world-class beaches you reach by boat. Number 4, Matlacha. This one is hard to spell and even harder to forget. Matlacha, pronounced Matlacha, is a tiny fishing island community near Pine Island on the Gulf Coast, and it is possibly the most colorful town in all of Florida, and I mean that literally. The whole village is painted in wild, bright, clashing colors. Hot pink galleries next to lime green cottages, next to turquoise bait shops, next to a purple ice cream stand. It looks like a box of crayons exploded and everyone collectively decided they loved it and never cleaned up. Matlacha has a great origin story. It was never really planned. It grew up as a rough little fishing settlement on a man-made island formed from the dirt dug out when they built the causeway, and for decades it was just a working-class fishing village. Then artists discovered the cheap waterfront and the incredible light, and a colony grew up around the existing seafood shacks. Now, galleries and fish houses share a single narrow road that runs out over the water. There's a famous old bridge locals called the fishingest bridge in America, where people line up shoulder to shoulder to drop a line straight off the side. The vibe is creative, eccentric, unhurried, and defiantly weird in the best possible way. The honest catch is the same one that haunts so much of this stretch of coast. Matlacha sits in an area that took a direct, catastrophic hit from a major hurricane in recent years, one of the worst storms in the region's history. The little island was hammered, homes and galleries were destroyed, and the community had to rebuild piece by colorful piece. The resilience here is genuinely moving. Artists and fishermen came back, repainted, and reopened, refusing to let the place die. But anyone seriously considering this part of the Gulf Coast has to take the storm risk seriously, because the same warm, shallow water that makes it paradise also leaves it deeply exposed. Number 3, Defuniak Springs. Now for something almost nobody outside Florida has heard of. Defuniak Springs in the Panhandle is built around something genuinely strange and beautiful, a near perfectly round natural spring lake. It's so symmetrical that for years people seriously debated whether it could possibly be natural, since it looks like someone drew it with a compass. It's one of only a couple of naturally round lakes on the entire planet, and around that round lake sits one of the most surprising collections of history in the state. In the 1880s, this little spot became the winter home of the Chautauqua movement, a hugely popular cultural and educational movement that brought lectures, concerts, and classes to towns across America. They built an elegant assembly hall and a ring of stunning Victorian homes around the lake, and a remarkable amount of it is still standing today. There's a library that's one of the oldest in the state still operating in its original building, complete with an antique weapons collection because, of course, it is. You can walk or bike the loop around the perfectly round lake, past those gorgeous old gingerbread homes, and the cost of living here is dramatically, almost shockingly lower than anything on the coast. Your housing dollar stretches 2 or 3 times further inland than it does on the beach. This is one of the genuinely affordable paradises left in the state. The catch is simple honesty. Defuniak Springs is small, inland, and quiet, which means it does not have the beaches, the nightlife, or the booming job market of the bigger Florida cities. The Gulf is about a 45-minute drive south. If you need ocean access out your front door and a buzzing economy, this isn't your spot. But if you want a beautiful, historic, deeply affordable small town where your money goes a long way and the loudest sound on a given afternoon is the wind moving across a perfectly round lake, you should know this place exists. Number 2. Steinhatchee. Steinhatchee, pronounced Steinhatchee, sits on the Big Bend coast, that gentle curve where the panhandle melts into the peninsula. An area locals call the Forgotten Coast, or the Nature Coast for very good reason. This is a fishing and scalloping town where the salt marsh meets the Gulf, and where the rhythm of life is set entirely by the tides and the seasons, not by a clock. The magic of Steinhatchee is the scalloping. Every summer the season opens and families wade and snorkel through the shallow grass flats just offshore, scooping up bay scallops by hand, like an underwater Easter egg hunt with a seafood dinner as the prize. It's a tradition that has stayed almost entirely local and almost entirely unchanged, the kind of authentic old Florida experience the postcards were actually selling before the postcards started lying. The Steinhatchee River winds through the town, lined with fish camps and a surprisingly nice riverfront lodge, and the entire place smells like salt and possibility. This part of the coast is special because it never got developed. There are no high-rises, no resort towers, no neon strip. The Big Bend is one of the last truly wild stretches of Gulf coastline left in the state, where the marsh and the Cedar Islands and the seagrass flats look about the way they did a century ago. It's a fisherman's paradise and a quiet seeker's dream. The catch is that Steinhatchee is remote and undeveloped, and that's precisely the point. There's not much in the way of nightlife, shopping, or convenience. You come here to fish, to scallop, to disappear, and to watch the sun melt into the marsh with a cold drink and exactly 0 notifications. And like so much of this coast, it has weathered serious storms in recent years that tested the town's grit. But if your idea of paradise is a place that genuinely seems to have forgotten the modern world exists, Steinhatchee is sitting out there on the forgotten coast, waiting for you to remember it. Last subscribe reminder before the big one, and then I'll leave you alone, I promise. If even one of these towns made you quietly open a real estate app in another tab, that's the channel doing its job. Hit subscribe so the next one finds you. Now, number 1. Number 1. Anna Maria Island. I know. An island this beautiful can't possibly still count as underrated. But here's the thing about Anna Maria Island, just off the coast near Bradenton. The locals fought, and are still fighting, to keep it exactly the way it is, and against all odds, they have largely won. Anna Maria Island has a strict rule limiting building height. Nothing towers over the palm trees. There are no high-rise condos crushing the skyline, no giant resort monoliths blocking the Gulf, none of the concrete canyon you see on so much of the Florida coast. Instead, there are old wooden beach cottages, a free trolley that runs the entire length of the island so you can ditch your car completely, historic fishing piers stretching out into the water, and some of the softest, whitest sand in America. The town deliberately froze itself in a gentler era and refused every offer to cash in. The result is a place that genuinely feels like Florida looked 50 or 60 years ago. There are actually 3 small towns spread along the 7-mile island, each with its own personality, but they share the same stubborn philosophy. Keep it small, keep it low, keep it ours. The main commercial strip is a walkable village of mom-and-pop shops, ice cream stands, and seafood shacks, with not a single fast food chain in sight. People get around on bikes, on the trolley, or on foot, and the pace forces you to actually relax whether you planned to or not. This is the payoff of everything we've talked about today. The towns that stay paradise are the ones that fight to stay small. Anna Maria capped the buildings. Seaside banned the strip malls. Boca Grande never installed a single traffic light. Crystal River put the manatees first. Cedar Key let the railroad leave and never chased it down. The pattern is the entire point. Paradise in Florida isn't a place that got lucky. It's a place that drew a line in the sand, sometimes literally, and refused to cross it. So, what's the catch for number one? Honestly, it's the same catch as success itself. Anna Maria Island is popular, the cottages are not cheap, and in peak season, the trolley fills up and the beaches get genuinely busy. Preservation. This good stopped being a secret a long time ago, but the soul of the place is fully intact, and that's far rarer than cheap. You're not paying for square footage here. You're paying for a town that loved itself enough to stay exactly what it was, while everything around it sold out. That's the whole list. 12 towns, mostly one beautiful coast, and a single stubborn idea running through all of them. The best places aren't the ones that grew the fastest. They're the ones that knew exactly what they had and refused to let anyone pave it over for a parking lot. If you're seriously dreaming about one of these, do your homework on the storm risk, the cost of living, the insurance, and the seasons. Because every paradise has a price and a fine print, and on this coast, the fine print sometimes shows up as a hurricane. And if this video helped you find a place you'd never even heard of, subscribe and stick around. Because the next one is a list of the cheapest beach towns left in America, and a couple of them might genuinely surprise you. As of this year, all 12 of these towns are still standing, still fighting, and still worth the drive. Some of them might not stay this quiet forever. So maybe don't tell too many people, except the algorithm.